Minister, the Energy Benefits Cost Scheme, which we're talking about today, forms part of a package of budget interventions that were recently put forward in October 2021 by the European Union and the Commission's toolbox of interventions and how we can go about, and Member States can go about tackling the rise of energy costs. And I'd really ask anyone to read it today. It's really interesting. I think it's going to perform quite an important arsenal in the tools that we can use, not just in the next 18 months, but over the next 8 years as we move towards our 70% renewable energy targets. So when you actually look at some of the recent price hikes that are due to be implemented in spring, for example, in April, it is quite worrying, and I can see why it is so worrying for consumers and people. But that's why it's so important to expand on the measures and the emergency measures that we are taking as a government to reduce those concerns. So just for example, SSE electricity, 0.62% in electricity, 0.4% gas increase, effective 1st of April. Energia, 0.8.6 in electricity increase, 0.5.7 in gas, 5th of April. Panda Energy, 0.7.5 electricity increase, effective 8th of April. Flow gas, 0.8.5% electricity and 0.6.5% on the 12th of April. So that's just coming along in April. And it's not just only in Ireland, Minister, that we're facing this, it's right across the European Union. And the reason for that is because of the increased global demand as we've exited a pandemic. But it's also important to remember that, and the Senator really said, markets are expected to stabilise at some stage and possibly early next year, 2022. But while this level of instability exists, it's really important that we're able to introduce emergency measures like this emergency measure that, as Senator O'Reilly said, we decided to not go ahead with pre-legislative scrutiny, and we're able to introduce it across the board very, very quickly. And that's what's really important about that. And there will be at other stages between now and 2023 where instability could come again. And I think it will be really important for the government then to rely back upon that European toolbox of measures that I think would be really useful, because there's a lot of decent suggestions there. And what we're going with is their main suggestion, which is measures where Member States can make payments to those most at risk to pay their energy bills. And this has been financed with the EU emissions trading system. Alongside this, I think it's important at some stage, Minister, we could give considerations to introducing some sort of safeguards to make sure that energy companies can't disconnect people from their energy supply. And I think that would be useful, that if people were to fall into some sort of arrears, if things got worse, that we introduce safeguards like that. There's also a lot of other measures that we could introduce. For example, and this again is just a suite of things we can do. We're just doing one of these things now, but if things get worse, we can introduce an energy taxation directive where you can temporarily exempt or apply a reduced tax rate for vulnerable households directly on electricity, natural gas, coal, solid fuels. We can also do a lot to empower and protect consumers here in Ireland. We can provide people right across this country with quality information and options about how they too themselves can participate in the energy market. A faster and easier switching of suppliers is one way we can definitely go about this. We can further boost the role of consumers in the market, and we plan to do this where people are going to be able to generate their own electricity. They're going to be able to use that electricity themselves. They're going to be able to sell that back into the grid. So these are just a range of measures that I'm trying to talk about that we can use and we can implement as a government if we come across further price instability in electricity markets like we're doing now. There's one, I suppose, while I'm on that point of selling energy back into the grid and creating our own energy and energy communities, I want to make a small diversion into solar energy, because both solar and wind are going to play such an important role with hitting our targets by 2030 and in reducing our reliance on fossil fuels. And as a result, by reducing our reliance on fossil fuels, we're going to decrease the possibility of price instability. But it's something I raised with the Minister before during a committee a couple of months ago, and it's the issue of capital acquisitions tax and its impact on the agricultural community and the renewable energy sector. So the current capital acquisitions tax states that beneficiaries who inherit agricultural land are for 90% relief on the market value of the asset. But this is contingent on the total land being utilised for solar panels constituting less than 50% of the total land holding. So I think this threshold of 50% needs to be removed, because the point is we're not going to be able to incentivise people in the agricultural community to move into full-blown solar farming if we're going to impact them on capital acquisitions tax if they want to pass that farm on to be inherited at some stage. We want people to be able to turn around and say, yeah, I have a huge massive field here and I'm going to put 100% solar farms on it and not 49.5% or something like that. And we're going to actually remove a barrier that exists in the agricultural community today to introduce some wide-scale capital acquisitions tax. It's something that Minister Paschal Donoghue we'll have to look at. It's something I spoke to the Minister about before, and it's something that perhaps I'd appreciate, Minister, at some stage in the future we could meet very briefly about that, and you could pass on the same concerns to Minister O'Donoghue. But that would just be a really simple way that we can remove a current barrier that exists to make sure we can generate even more solar energy as easily as possible for people who want to get into it. Because people, and it was mentioned by Mary Robinson earlier on today, it's that, like, people sometimes, and I found this myself when I first got involved as a climate action spokesperson 18 months ago, people can be scared by the science of the debate, they can be scared by the nuance of the debate. It can be an intimidating thing trying to get involved in the climate action debate when you're up against people like yourself or other people who've been involved in for decades. And what we need to do is make it as simple as possible for the average Irish person to engage in that. So we do that by making we make it financially viable for people. So we're doing that through the retrofit programme. We're doing that where we're introducing so much electric vehicle charging points. We're putting in so many grants. We're making it financially simple for people to want to live a green and sustainable lifestyle, that they're able to do so. So we're making it financially possible, but we're also making it hassle-less free and easy as possible. And an example we're doing that is through the concept of the one-stop shops in the retrofit programme, where someone is actually going to project manage the whole thing. But that just goes back, the reason I went off on a slight tangent there, but it goes back to the solar energy point, that if we want people to be able to engage people in the agricultural community on a wide scale level of solar farming in this country, I really think we need to remove that 50% barrier, and I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on that. And in short, and I suppose to conclude the points that I was making, while we move towards renewable energy, it promises the potential in the long term for much cheaper prices, and over the short to the medium term, consumers may have to deal with this level of price instability that we are seeing. But that is the whole point of the legislation that we're introducing today, and the whole point of the other suite of measures that the European Union and the toolkit and everything else have said that we can introduce. Because while we are making that transition to a renewable energy economy, while we are working really hard over the next 8 years to get to our 70% with wind and solar, we need to be able to introduce emergency measures, or at least have fallback plans and a suite of measures that we can introduce, like we have done now, to protect the Irish consumer against any form of price instability or energy prices. And I just think today is a really good example of one way we're doing that, but it's just one of many, many other tools in our armoury that will be open not only to this government but to member states right across the European Union.